Hey guys, you're watching Diary of Betrayal. Things are about to get crazy. Are you ready to dive into shocking stories of cheating and betrayal? Let's go.
I returned home after a week-long business trip. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but the thought of seeing my family eased the nagging tension in my neck and shoulders. I always looked forward to these rare moments of reunion. When Emily would prepare my favorite dinner, Sophie would rush out of her room with stories about school, and little Timmy would throw himself into my arms, excitedly sharing his latest adventures. Our home was my sanctuary, a place where I felt needed and loved. But this time, something felt wrong. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I sensed an odd atmosphere. The house, usually buzzing with noise and activity, greeted me with silence. A single light glowed in the kitchen, but there was no smell of dinner, only a faint, unsettling unease in the air. I dropped my suitcase by the door and paused, listening. Light footsteps shuffled somewhere deeper in the house, like those of my daughter. "Dad?" Sophie's voice called. She appeared in her doorway, clutching her tablet to her chest. Her face looked tense, almost unfamiliar. "Hey, kiddo," I said with a smile, crouching by the hall table and opening my arms. But Sophie didn't run to me as she usually did. She approached slowly, letting me pull her into a hug. "Why so quiet? Where's Mom?" She stared at the floor, as if the rug's pattern held some secret. "Mom's not home," she replied after a pause. "She said she went to a friend's." I frowned. That didn't add up. Emily never left the kids alone, especially at night. She always had countless reasons to be home when I returned from trips. "Which friend?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Sophie shrugged and bit her lip. She was clearly nervous, as if she knew something but was afraid to say it. "Have you eaten?" I changed the subject, standing and heading to the kitchen. "Yeah," she whispered, then added, "Dad, please don't be mad." I stopped and turned to her. "Why would I be mad?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. Sophie bit her lip harder, then blurted, "I think Mom's seeing someone, not a friend." Her words hit like a thunderbolt. I froze, as if doused with ice water. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "What did you say?" My voice turned sharp, almost unrecognizable. Sophie stepped back, frightened. "I saw her with some man," she said, as if afraid to back down. He picked her up in a black SUV. They were standing in the yard. Mom was talking to him and laughing. I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest. My hands clenched into fists, and my heart pounded so loudly it seemed to echo in the silence. I tried to stay calm, though inside I was boiling. "When was this?" I asked, striving to sound even. "A few times," Sophie replied, looking at the floor again. "The last time was yesterday evening. I saw it from the window." I didn't know what to say. Everything I'd considered solid and unshakable in my life began to crumble. I'd always trusted Emily. We had typical family issues, but I never doubted her loyalty. I walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge, trying to focus on something simple. Inside were an empty yogurt container, a couple of jars of baby food, and an open bottle of wine. That threw me off even more. Emily rarely drank, except on holidays. I closed the door and turned around. Sophie's eyes were brimming with tears. She looked like she wasn't sure if she'd done the right thing by telling me. A 14-year-old girl had been forced to carry this heavy secret on her fragile shoulders. "Don't worry," I said, trying to sound gentle. "Everything will be okay. You did the right thing." I walked over and hugged her, but my mind was already racing, calculating the next step. I needed to uncover the truth, and fast. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. A sleepless night had drained me, but it only strengthened my resolve. While Sophie got ready for school, I sat in the kitchen with a mug of black coffee, trying to organize my thoughts. They were a mess, but one thing was clear. I had to verify everything. I didn't want to jump to conclusions or base accusations on a child's observations. After Sophie left, I decided to act. I needed to figure out who this mysterious man was that she mentioned. recalling her words about a black SUV. I started with the security cameras in our yard. I'd always been methodical. My job as a programmer taught me to find answers in data and facts. I headed to the property management office in the neighboring building. I dealt with their staff before when installing our alarm system, so persuading security to help wasn't hard. A couple of cans of expensive coffee from a nearby store sealed the deal. The cameras didn't record audio, but the footage from the past week was clear enough. I reviewed the recordings carefully. On the fourth day, I found what I was looking for. A black SUV pulled up to our building late in the evening. The camera clearly showed Emily stepping out of the entrance. She carried a small bag. She approached the vehicle with a smile and opened the passenger door. The man behind the wheel stayed in the shadows, but it was obvious they knew each other well. She got in, and the car drove off. It looked like an ordinary trip, except for the smile on my wife's face and the subtle gesture when she touched the man's shoulder. I felt the air grow thick. I stared at the screen as if it were someone else's life, but every detail of that brief video struck my mind. I couldn't pretend it was a mistake. Something was wrong. I returned home with a copy of the footage. A plan was forming in my mind. Emily was due back from work later that evening, but I decided to take the next step, identify the man. The recording gave me a clue, the license plate. I called my friend from the auto shop. "Dan, I need a favor," I said without preamble. "Can you run a license plate?" He didn't ask too many questions, only said, "Everything okay, Mike?" "Not sure yet," I replied. "Just do it quick, please." A couple of hours later, Dan called back. The plate was registered to Jason Carter, a local businessman. Married, 2 kids. I thanked him, but the name Jason Carter meant nothing to me. So I dug deeper. The internet is full of information if you know where to look. Soon, I found Jason's social media profile. A tall man, about 40, well-groomed, in most photos with his wife and 2 children. I stared at his face for a long time, trying to figure out what he could offer Emily that I couldn't. There was no answer. When Emily came home, I was ready to confront her. She walked in, tired, took off her coat, and noticed me standing in the kitchen. Her face briefly showed surprise, which she quickly hid behind a familiar smile. "You're home?" she said. "How was your day?" I looked at her closely. She stepped forward confidently, but I noticed her movements were slightly stiff. "Fine," I said, sipping my tea. "And yours?" "Fine too," she replied, looking away as if searching for a way to change the subject. "Were you at a friend's yesterday?" I asked suddenly. She looked up, but her reaction was too slow to avoid suspicion. "Yeah, at Linda's," she said. I set my mug down slowly. My gaze was so intense that she started to fidget. "That's odd," I said calmly. "I saw the security footage from the yard. You left the building and got into a black SUV. The driver was a man. Does Linda drive SUVs now?" Emily paled. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her face twisted as she scrambled for an excuse, but nothing convincing came to mind. I gave her time. I sat still, waiting for her to break the silence. "Mike, it's not what you think," she finally managed. "Really? What do I think?" My voice was cold. "Just a colleague," Emily said. "He gave me a ride home. That's all." I nodded, as if agreeing, then pulled out the flash drive with the footage and placed it on the table. "Watch it and tell me again it's nothing." Her face contorted. She knew she was caught. "Mike, it doesn't matter," she said, but I stood up sharply. "Doesn't matter?" I shouted for the first time. "You get in his car, smile, touch his shoulder, and it doesn't matter?" Emily turned away, as if avoiding my gaze. "I'll explain everything," she started quietly. "Explain?" I was breathing heavily, trying to regain control. "You know what, Emily? I don't need explanations anymore. It's clear enough." I walked past her, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To find the truth." I snapped, slamming the door behind me. I drove through empty streets, adrenaline coursing through every cell. Answers awaited me, or perhaps even more pain. I spent the night at my computer. Sleep was impossible. Every detail of the situation, like puzzle pieces, formed a coherent but terrifying picture. I felt like a stranger in my own life. The home I loved and built, the one I thought belonged to me and my family, had betrayed me. Had I not noticed before? Or had I just ignored the signs? I opened Jason's social media profile again. I studied his photos, searching for something in this man that could explain his connection to Emily. He didn't seem remarkable. An ordinary guy, quite average. But there was something about him, maybe a confidence I lacked? I didn't know. Fatigue and pain mixed in my chest, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know more. The next day, I decided it was time to act decisively. Morning greeted me with gray light and a sense that there was no turning back. I knew a direct conversation with Emily wouldn't yield the truth. Her reaction the previous night proved that. But I had a lead, the license plate and a name, Jason Carter. I started with the basics. Jason's social media didn't reveal everything, but it gave enough to figure out where he worked. His profile mentioned a small company selling construction materials. I decided to check if he and Emily crossed paths professionally. She was a manager at a logistics firm, and I knew her company sometimes dealt with suppliers of building materials. It could be a coincidence, but I had to be sure. I called an old acquaintance, Brad, who worked at the city transportation department. "Brad, can you help me with something?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I need info on a car's owner." Brad agreed without prying, though his tone hinted at curiosity. "Give me a couple of hours," he said. While I waited, my thoughts swirled like autumn leaves in the wind. I tried to recall if Emily had shown any unusual behavior before. She occasionally stayed late at work, but I never thought much of it. Was I too trusting? Or did I just not want to see the truth? Brad called back around noon. "Mike, your guy's Jason Carter, 40 years old, owns a small business," he said. "Married, 2 kids. Nothing suspicious in the records, just a regular guy." I thanked him, but deep down, I felt that regular was just a facade. I went back to my computer and kept digging. An online search turned up a few mentions of Jason in local business news. He was a typical mid-level entrepreneur, sponsored school fairs, spoke at community forums. But one detail caught my attention. His company did supply materials to Emily's firm. That didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. That evening, Emily came home later than usual. I was in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but really waiting for her. She walked in, tossed her bag on the couch, and without looking at me, said, "You're home early?" Her voice was tight, like a stretched string. "Wanted to spend time with the family," I replied, eyes fixed on the screen. "Where were you?" She hesitated before answering. "At a client meeting." It dragged on. I nodded, but inside, I was seething. "A client, huh?" I said, turning to face her. "Like Jason Carter, maybe?" Her face froze. She tried to feign surprise, but her eyes betrayed panic. "What are you talking about, Mike?" she asked, her voice trembling. "About the fact that I know," I said, standing up from the couch. "I saw the security footage. You get in his car. You smile. That doesn't look like a business meeting." Emily looked away, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. "You've got it all wrong," she finally said, but her words sounded hollow. "Then explain," I said, stepping closer. "Tell me why you're lying to me. Why Sophie saw you with him more than once." She flinched at the mention of our daughter. "You dragged Sophie into this?" Her voice sharpened. "She told me herself," I snapped. "Because she's worried. You apparently aren't." Emily covered her face with her hands, as if trying to hide. "Mike, please, it's not what you think," she whispered. I stared at her, and part of me wanted to believe her. But the other part, the one that saw the footage, that felt her lies, couldn't. "I'm done with excuses," I said. "I want the truth." She stayed silent. I grabbed my keys and left without another word. I spent the night in my car, parked near a park. Sleep wouldn't come, my thoughts wouldn't let me rest. I replayed our life with Emily in my mind. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a shared home. Was it all a lie? Or had I just missed how she was pulling away? The next day, I decided to meet Jason's wife. Her name was Clara, and I found her through social media. I sent a brief message, "Hello, Clara. I'm Mike. We need to talk about your husband and my wife. It's important." I wasn't sure she'd reply, but an hour later, I got a response, "Where can we meet?" Her tone was businesslike, almost cold. We arranged to meet at a cafe near her house. I brought the flash drive with the footage, though I hesitated until the last moment about showing it. But every doubt only fueled my determination. Jason deserved to be exposed, and so did Emily. Clara was an attractive woman with tired eyes. Her gaze held a mix of struggle and strength. She looked at me closely as I walked in and gestured for me to sit. "Show me," she said without preamble. I handed her my laptop and plugged in the flash drive. Clara watched the screen in silence. When the video ended, she closed the laptop and sat still for a few seconds. "Thank you," she said at last, her voice wavering. I suspected something was off, but she trailed off. "I thought you should know," I said. Clara gave a bitter smile. "It's not your fault. It's his choice," she replied. We talked a bit more. Clara shared that their marriage had been crumbling for a while, but she tried to hold it together for their kids. I felt an odd respect for her. She carried herself with dignity despite the pain. When I got home, I found Emily in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, staring into space. Seeing me, she jumped up. "Mike, we need to talk," she said. Her voice was desperate, but I no longer felt pity. "There's nothing to talk about," I said coldly. "I know enough." She stepped toward me, trying to grab my arm. "Mike, I've always loved you." It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. I shook my head. "Emily, I don't need your excuses. You had a family, a home. You chose to destroy it. I have nothing left to say." I walked past her to the bedroom, packed a few things, and left. She shouted after me, but I didn't turn back. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over. A month had passed since I told Emily to leave. It was a tense time, but it also brought an odd sense of freedom. Mornings began with caring for the kids, work, and small household tasks that once felt mundane but now grounded me. I tried to shield Sophie and Timmy from the void, but I knew they sensed the changes, even if I hid them. Sophie grew quieter, withdrawing into herself. She spent hours with her books, rarely asking questions. Timmy was too young to grasp it all, but he often asked, "Dad, when's Mom coming back?" I answered gently, hiding the pain his words caused. "Buddy, Mom will always be your mom, and you can talk to her whenever you want." I didn't want to sever their bond with Emily. Despite my hurt, I knew they loved and needed her. My sister, Laura, became a lifeline for our family. She was always ready to help, with Sophie's homework, dinner, or the little things I'd taken on. One evening, when Sophie was asleep and Timmy dozed on the couch, Laura and I sat in the kitchen. Street lights flickered outside, and the air carried the scent of freshly brewed tea. "I don't know how we'd have managed without you," I said, looking at her. Laura lowered her gaze for a moment. "Mike," she began, "you've always been my role model. Even when I saw how Emily..." She hesitated, searching for words. "She didn't value you the way you deserved." I kept thinking, how does he put up with it? I sighed. Guess I wanted to believe in the best. In us. Laura looked at me. "But you know, now I see life can be different. And that's because of you." She blushed and seemed about to say more, but Timmy's sleepy voice came from the living room. "Dad, is Laura staying with us forever?" I smiled. "Let me tuck him in," I said, but his question lingered in my mind. Every day, I noticed Laura becoming part of our lives. She connected effortlessly with the kids, cheering Sophie up and calming Timmy during his tantrums. She was a gentle, caring presence that brought stability. One night at dinner, Sophie suddenly said, "Dad, Have you noticed the house feels warmer with Aunt Laura around? I looked at my daughter. She was right. Laura had filled our home with a warmth missing since Emily left. You're right, I said with a smile. Laura looked embarrassed but stayed quiet. A couple of weeks later, I decided to plan a family outing to a park outside town. Sophie suggested spending a day outdoors, and Laura eagerly joined, taking charge of the picnic. The day was surprisingly warm for mid-autumn. Leaves glowed in gold and amber, and the air smelled of fallen foliage and crisp breezes. Laura, the kids, and I wandered forest trails, collecting colorful leaves and staging a playful race. Timmy's laughter echoed through the woods. We set up a picnic on a clearing. Laura pulled out a thermos of hot tea and containers of pies she'd baked that morning. This is the best thing I've eaten in months, I said, biting into one. You're just hungry, Laura laughed. No, Laura, you're a magician, I countered. She smiled, and I caught a new warmth in her eyes, something I'd started noticing more often. When the kids got caught up playing with sticks, Laura and I were left alone. We sat in silence, savoring the moment. You know, I said, I thought for a long time that I'd never move on after all this. Laura looked at me. You're strong, Mike. You've done what few could, she said softly. Only because of you, I replied, and our eyes met. In that moment, I realized something deeper than support was growing between us. Winter settled in. Snow crunched underfoot, blanketing streets and parks, while frost traced patterns on windows. On days like these, I looked for ways to keep the kids entertained during the cold months. The idea of a ski resort trip came out of nowhere but instantly sparked excitement in Sophie and Timmy's eyes. It would be our first family getaway without Emily, a new chapter for us. Laura offered to join, and I agreed without hesitation. She'd become an essential part of our little family, and her presence promised to make the trip even more special. The resort welcomed us with snowy slopes and cozy cabins, smoke curling from their chimneys. I'd booked a small wooden cottage with a fireplace in advance. As soon as we stepped inside, the kids squealed and scattered to explore the rooms. Timmy was thrilled by a Christmas tree decked out in colorful lights. This might be the best Christmas yet, Laura said, helping unpack. I smiled. Thanks for coming with us, I said, looking at her. Mike, I'm not here for you, she teased with a wink. It's all for the kids. We laughed, and that laughter chased away any lingering shadows of the past. On the second day, I decided to teach Timmy to ski. It was tougher than I expected. He kept falling but got up each time with boundless enthusiasm. Dad, I'm gonna be a champion, he declared, struggling to balance. You bet you will, I chuckled, holding his hand. Sophie, meanwhile, was learning to snowboard with a group of teens. She seemed engrossed, and I was glad to see her shyness fading. Laura skied alone, her grace and confidence on the slopes impressive. I couldn't take my eyes off her. You're amazing, I said when she rejoined me after a run. Just lots of practice, she replied, smiling as she brushed snow off her hat. On the third day, something unexpected happened. On one of the slopes, Timmy, forgetting caution, decided to speed up but lost control. He tumbled down and crashed into a snowboarder standing nearby. Sorry, he yelled, scrambling to his feet. I watched from above and rushed down to check on him. Thankfully, the fall looked worse than it was. You okay? I asked the girl he'd hit, helping her up. Yeah, I'm fine, she said, dusting off her jacket. Just then, a tall man hurried toward us. Kate, you all right? He asked, addressing the girl, who turned out to be his daughter. I'm good, Dad, she smiled. The man looked at me, and our eyes met. David, he said, extending a hand. Mike, I replied, shaking it. That's how we met. David was a cardiologist. He'd come to the resort with his daughter, Kate, to spend time together after a rough year. We hit it off quickly, both being serious types used to responsibility. Later, over dinner at a slopeside cafe, Laura and David struck up a conversation. I noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible connection forming between them. Laura, usually reserved, smiled more than usual. David listened to her with genuine interest. The kids bonded fast, too. Despite the age gap, Sophie happily helped Kate with snowboarding, while Timmy eagerly shared tales of his heroic attempts to conquer the slopes. That evening, back at the cottage, I sat by the fireplace with a mug of hot tea. Laura joined me, wrapping herself in a blanket. "David's an interesting guy, isn't he?" she remarked. I smiled. "Mind if I say he thinks you're interesting too?" I replied. Laura blushed slightly but didn't brush it off. "He's nice. Seems like he's been through a lot," she said after a pause. "So have you, Laura," I added quietly. She turned to me, and our eyes met for a moment. "You take such good care of us," I went on. "I hope someone can take care of you too." Laura didn't respond. She just pulled the blanket tighter and gazed at the fire thoughtfully. Over the next few days, we spent more time with David and Kate. It was a strange but wonderful feeling. Two adults, recently adrift, found comfort in each other's company. At one of the final dinners, David said, "Mike, I've got to thank you for letting me meet people like you all." I was surprised. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You know," he said with a smile, "after loss, it feels like life won't ever be the same. Meeting you reminded me you just have to open up to something new." I thought about it. I glanced at Laura, who was quietly talking with Kate and Sophie. Her soft laugh was like a melody I could listen to forever. "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "You're right. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It's the start of something new." While I was enjoying the winter getaway with family and new friends, Emily's life was spiraling. After I refused to reconcile, her world collapsed completely. Every day in her rundown one-bedroom apartment reminded her of what she'd lost. 3 weeks after our confrontation, she was fired. Her bosses, noticing her constant tardiness and indifference to projects, suggested she leave quietly. She did, trying to hold on to some dignity, but inside, there was nothing left but anger and self-pity. Emily often thought of Jason as a last lifeline to cling to. But Jason, as if sensing her desperation, vanished from her life. He stopped answering calls and texts. When she showed up at his house one day, an older woman, his mother, opened the door. "What do you want?" she asked coldly, her gaze dripping with disdain. "I'm looking for Jason," Emily said, avoiding her eyes. "He's not here," the woman snapped. "Don't come back." Emily started to say something, but the door slammed shut. That was the final straw. She spent her evenings alone with a bottle of wine or something stronger. Her once polished appearance faded. Her hair lost its shine, dark circles formed under her eyes. The stylish clothes she used to wear looked out of place against the peeling walls of her apartment. Sometimes she turned on the TV, but the sounds annoyed her, a reminder that others were living real lives out there. Occasionally, she scrolled through old photos on her phone, family holidays, trips with the kids and me. Each image was a stab to the heart. Pictures of Sophie and Timmy hurt the most. They felt so distant, like they belonged to another world. She tried calling Sophie, but her daughter's responses were curt and cold. Timmy sometimes talked to her, but his voice was detached, as if he'd already adjusted to life without her. "Do you visit them?" Laura asked one night when Emily called her, drunk, late in the evening. "Mike doesn't want to see me," Emily replied. "That's no excuse," Laura said calmly. "If you really want to rebuild things with your kids, start small. Show up, talk, no excuses. Just be there." Emily hung up. Laura irritated her. Her calm advice only highlighted how deeply Emily was stuck in her mess. One evening, as she finished another bottle of cheap wine, there was a knock at the door. It was Jason. He looked as rough as she did, rumpled suit, grim expression, reeking of alcohol. "What are you doing here?" Emily asked, not hiding her anger. "Wanted to talk," he said uncertainly, stepping inside without an invitation. They sat at the table. Minutes passed in silence until Jason spoke. "You know, I'm sorry. Things didn't go the way we thought." "We didn't think anything," Emily shot back coldly. "You just bailed when it got tough." "I've got my own problems," he started to defend himself, but she cut him off. "You ruined my life, Jason. Do you get that?" He stared at the floor, silent. I didn't force you, he said quietly. Those words were the final spark. Emily jumped up, grabbed the bottle from the table, and hurled it at the wall. Glass shattered, the sound ringing in the room. Get out, she screamed. Get out of my life. Jason, startled by her fury, hurried to the door, leaving her alone. The next day, a neighbor found her. She'd called the police after hearing loud noises from Emily's apartment. When they broke in, Emily was lying on the floor amid broken glass and empty bottles. They took her to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed severe alcohol poisoning. When she woke up, I was standing in her room. I looked at her coldly but with concern. Why are you here? She whispered. Because, despite everything, you're the mother of my kids, I said. But Emily, this is the last time. If you don't pull yourself together, I can't help you anymore. My words hit her harder than she expected. She turned to the wall, but I saw tears on her cheeks. After her discharge, Emily returned to her apartment, but that hospital stay was a wake-up call. She'd hit rock bottom, and there was only one way to go, up. She started small, got rid of the bottles, signed up for therapy, looked for temp work. It was a long, painful process, but she realized that if she wanted even a sliver of her old life back, she'd have to fight for it. Emily knew the door to me was closed, but maybe she could still earn her kids' respect and find meaning in her new, solitary life. Jason returned to his mother's house a few weeks after cutting ties with Emily completely. His departure was as abrupt as his arrival. At 40, he still hadn't learned to face the consequences of his actions. His mother, Margaret, a woman of strict principles, took him in, but not without criticism. How long are you going to act like a teenager? She asked when Jason showed up, saying he needed to stay for a while. You have a wife, a family. What are you doing here? Jason didn't know how to respond and just shrugged. He'd never been able to stand up to her. As a kid, it was her tough lessons on discipline. As a teen, her endless lectures. And even now, as an adult, he felt like a boy who'd forgotten his homework. Just don't ask questions, Mom, he muttered, heading to the living room. I need some time. Things didn't go the way I planned. Margaret sighed but didn't press further. She knew her son too well. If he was back, he'd done something he couldn't fix on his own. Meanwhile, Clara, Jason's wife, was making her own plans. After our meeting at the cafe, she felt drained but not broken. Her marriage to Jason had been falling apart for years, but proof of his affair was the final blow. She didn't make scenes or lose control. Clara was too proud for that. Instead, she gathered evidence, messages, receipts, photos. Her job at a law firm gave her the tools to prepare for a divorce. When Jason showed up at their shared home, Clara greeted him calmly. You look like you'd rather avoid this, she said, arms crossed. Jason stayed silent. He brushed past her into the hallway, as if nothing had happened, and tossed his keys on the table. Clara, I needed time to think, he said. His voice sounded confident, but she caught the falseness immediately. Clara didn't let him finish. She pulled a folder from the table and threw it in front of him. You've thought enough. These are divorce papers. Sign them. Jason froze. His eyes darted between the papers and her face. Clara, are you serious? He said, trying to sound shocked. Can we talk? We can fix this. Fix it? She gave a bitter laugh. Jason, you wrecked our marriage long ago. You're just being honest about it now. Jason had no reply. He was used to Clara's patience, but now he faced a different woman, strong, independent, unwavering. When Margaret heard about the divorce, her anger crashed over Jason like a storm. You didn't even try to save your family, she shouted, slamming the table. Thought you could live however you wanted, and it'd all just work out. Jason tried to shrug off her words, but deep down, he knew she was right. Mom, enough, he said wearily. I've heard it all from Clara. Your words won't change anything. Won't change anything? Her voice turned icy. You know what will? You. If you don't start owning your actions, you'll end up with nothing. Her words hit like a slap. Jason stood and left for his room, leaving his mother fuming. Meanwhile, Emily faced the fallout of her relationship with Jason. Word of her hospital stay reached Margaret, who was livid. One morning, as Emily returned from the store with heavy bags, she saw Margaret waiting by her building's entrance. Her presence felt both absurd and intimidating. "Can we talk?" Margaret asked. Her voice was dry, like a brittle leaf. Emily froze. She sensed the conversation would be rough but couldn't walk away. "Sure," she said, setting her bags down. "Do you realize what you've done?" Margaret began, locking eyes with her. "You ruined your family. My home. You dragged my son into this mess." Emily opened her mouth to speak, but Margaret cut her off. "You're pathetic. Did you think he'd leave Clara for you? That he'd build a future with you?" "It's not like that," Emily whispered faintly. "Then tell me what it's like," Margaret snapped. "You knew he was married. Knew he wasn't reliable. Yet you let him ruin your life." Her words pierced Emily like a blade. She stood there, shame flooding her face. "I get it," she said at last. "I'm sorry." But her apology didn't soften Margaret. She turned and walked away, leaving Emily in the cold. That exchange was another blow. Emily saw how her past choices had spiraled into a chain of mistakes, leading to total collapse. But she also began to realize that unless she took responsibility for her life, she'd stay stuck forever. That same night, Emily texted Sophie, "Sweetie, I know I've been a bad mom, but I want to be better. I want to earn your forgiveness. Maybe someday you'll give me a chance." There was no reply. But Emily knew she had to keep trying. It was her duty and her hope for redemption. The divorce with Emily went quickly and smoothly. She seemed to accept the inevitable, signing the papers without resistance or delay, her eyes empty, as if she were signing her own defeat. I felt an odd relief. The pain I'd carried was fading, giving way to something new, calm, maybe even hope. I tried not to dwell on the past. My life now revolved around the kids and Laura. I was rediscovering joy in small things: morning breakfasts, walks with the kids, evenings watching movies by the fireplace. Sophie grew noticeably calmer. Her smiles were no longer forced, and a spark returned to her eyes. She got along well with Laura, who seemed to understand her better than Emily ever had. One day, as they baked cookies together, Sophie suddenly asked, "And Laura, do you love Dad?" Laura froze for a moment, caught off guard. "I think so," she answered. "Then why don't you tell him?" Sophie pressed with a child's bluntness. "It's not that simple," Laura said softly, but her voice held no doubt. Sophie smiled, as if her own little scheme was taking shape. Emily, meanwhile, was trying to rebuild her life. After her talk with Margaret and weeks of painful self-reflection, she knew she couldn't go on as before. She got a job as a cashier at a small store. It was simple, repetitive work, far from her old logistics career, but it brought some order to her days. She kept texting Sophie, with little hope of a response. "Sophie, I know you're mad at me, and you're right to be. But I want you to know I think of you every day. I miss you." The messages went unanswered, but one day, Emily noticed Sophie had read them. It was a tiny shift. But to Emily, it meant everything. Laura and I grew closer. One evening marked a turning point. It was an ordinary day. The kids were asleep, and we sat in the kitchen over tea. The conversation turned to the future. "You know, Laura," I said, looking at her, "I never thought I'd feel happy again after all this." "You've gotten stronger, Mike," she said. "You've done what few could." "It's all because of you," I said quietly. Our eyes met, and it was as if an invisible barrier dissolved. I reached out and gently touched her hand. "You were there for us at our lowest," I continued. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Laura smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. "You already have, Mike," she whispered. In that moment, I knew our bond had grown into something more. It wasn't just friendship. It was a feeling we'd both been afraid to admit. Around the same time, David, my new friend, found his own happiness. After the ski trip, he kept in touch with Clara, Jason's wife. Their relationship started as friendship but soon deepened. Having gone through a divorce, Clara found in David the support and warmth she'd long missed in her marriage. One day, they met at a small cafe. David pulled out a little package and handed it to Clara with a smile. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Just wanted to make you happy," he said. Inside was a pendant on a delicate silver chain. Clara, touched by the gesture, looked at him and felt a warmth reignite in her heart. "Thank you, David," she said softly. "You're an incredible person." When the time came for my official divorce from Emily, it was quick. We met in court, exchanged formalities, and signed the papers. Emily looked at me, as if searching for a hint of forgiveness in my face. But my expression was cold, detached. After it was done, she caught up with me outside. "Mike," she called. I turned. "I know I can't fix anything," she said, staring at the ground. "But thank you for being in my life." I didn't reply. I just nodded and walked away. For Emily, it was the end. She stood by the courthouse doors, feeling her past dissolve for good. I went home and for the first time in ages, felt my life was truly mine again. That evening, I told Laura the divorce was finalized. "It's over," I said. "No, Mike," she replied with a smile. "It's a beginning." Her simple words rang so true. A new life lay ahead. Years passed. My life with my family found the steady, peaceful rhythm I'd longed for. Time dulled the pain of past events, and old wounds gave way to warmth, joy, and the realization that sometimes destruction paves the way for something new. Our home transformed. Family photos hung on the walls, the scent of fresh baking filled the air, and every corner radiated care and comfort. Laura, who over the years became not just a part of our lives but the heart of our home, brought it alive with her energy and love. Sophie graduated college, set on becoming a doctor. She'd grown into a confident, compassionate young woman whose determination and kindness inspired those around her. Timmy was now a restless but curious teenager, asking a million questions about everything and loving our time together. I did my best to be both a friend and a guide for him. Today was a special day. Sophie was getting married. The grand hall, adorned with flowers and candles, hummed with the chatter of guests eagerly discussing the event. I stood before a mirror, adjusting my tie, reflecting on how quickly time had flown. It seemed like just yesterday Sophie was the little girl hiding behind me, nervous about school recitals. Now she was stepping into adulthood. "You look great," Laura said, entering the room. I turned. She wore an elegant cream-colored dress, her hair neatly styled, her eyes glowing with a gentle light. "Thanks, Laura," I said with a smile. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You always manage, Mike," she said, stepping closer and touching my arm. We looked at each other for a long moment until she broke the silence. "So, ready to give your daughter away?" "Not quite," I chuckled. "But I guess I'll have to get used to it." The ceremony was breathtaking. Sophie, in a flowing white dress, looked like a princess, and her fiancé, Adam, held her hand with such tenderness that I knew she'd be happy. When the time came for the father of the bride's speech, I stepped to the microphone, feeling dozens of eyes on me. I adjusted my tie, gathered my thoughts, and began. "Today, I look at my daughter and see she's truly grown up. Sophie, you've always been my inspiration, even in the hardest times. I'm proud of you and the person you've become. Adam," I said, turning to the groom, "she's yours now. Cherish her, love her, protect her. She deserves the best." The room erupted in applause. I returned to my seat next to Laura, who squeezed my hand tightly, letting me know I'd done well. Emily was there too, seated in the back row, trying to stay unnoticed. Her presence was only possible because of Sophie's insistence on inviting her mother, despite the past. Emily had changed. Years of solitude and self-struggle had made her quieter, humbler, perhaps wiser. She'd found work at a small tailoring shop, sewing clothes. It didn't pay much, but it gave her stability and purpose. Watching Sophie laugh beside Adam, and me gazing at them with pride, Emily felt a soft but aching pain. In that moment, she fully grasped what she'd lost forever. After the ceremony, Sophie approached her mother. "Mom, thanks for coming," she said, hugging her. "Thank you for inviting me," Emily replied quietly. "You're trying to make things right," Sophie added. "That means more to me than you know." Those words were a faint glimmer of hope in Emily's world. That evening, as guests danced and laughed, Laura and I stepped onto the terrace for some fresh air. Snow fell gently, and stars sparkled in the night sky. "Everything went perfectly," Laura said, looking at me. "Yeah," I agreed. "And a lot of that's because of you." "I didn't do anything, Mike," she said with a smile. "You did more than you realize," I said, taking her hand. "You were there for us at our darkest moment. You became our family." Laura didn't have time to reply because I leaned in slowly and kissed her. That kiss confirmed what we'd both known but hesitated to admit. "Laura," I said softly, looking into her eyes, "you're the only one I want by my side. You made our home whole, and I need you to know I love you." She smiled, her cheeks glistening with tears. "I love you too, Mike," she said. That night marked a fresh start for everyone. For Sophie and Adam, embarking on their life together. For Emily, who finally found the strength to forgive herself. For Clara and David, who were among the guests and looked content. And of course, for Laura and me, who realized our family was now complete. Life went on, and this time, it promised to be truly happy. A year after Sophie's wedding, life continued to unfold with a quiet steadiness I hadn't thought possible back when everything fell apart. The seasons changed, and with them, our routine settled into something comforting, like a well-worn path. I'd taken on a new project at work, a challenging coding contract that kept my mind sharp and my days full. Timmy was thriving in high school, his curiosity about the world growing alongside his knack for getting into harmless mischief. Laura, now officially living with us, had turned our house into a haven, her warmth touching every detail, from the meals we shared to the way she listened when Timmy rambled about his latest interests. Laura and I were navigating our relationship with care, not rushing but savoring each moment. We'd grown closer, our bond built on years of trust and shared struggles. I'd catch her smiling at me across the breakfast table, and it felt like a promise that we'd figure it out together, whatever came next. Timmy, ever observant, had started dropping not-so-subtle hints. "Dad, when are you and Laura getting married?" he asked one evening, his grin half teasing, half serious. I'd laugh it off, but the question lingered, planting a seed I wasn't ready to ignore. Sophie and Adam had settled into their new life in a nearby city. She was deep into medical school, her days packed with classes and hospital rotations. Whenever she visited, she'd fill the house with stories about her patients, her eyes bright with purpose. Adam, a graphic designer, was supportive, balancing her intensity with his calm humor. I loved seeing them together, knowing Sophie had found someone who matched her strength. One crisp fall afternoon, I got a call from Sophie. Her voice was excited but nervous. "Dad, can you come over this weekend? We have something to tell you." I agreed, sensing it was big news. Laura insisted on joining, packing a basket of homemade muffins as a pretext, though we both knew she was just as curious as I was. When we arrived at their apartment, Sophie greeted us with a hug, her smile wider than usual. Adam stood behind her, looking proud but a little shy. We sat in their cozy living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, and Sophie took a deep breath. "Dad, Laura," she said, holding Adam's hand, "we're going to have a baby. I'm pregnant." The words hit me with a rush of joy. I stood and pulled Sophie into a tight hug, then shook Adam's hand, my grin unstoppable. Laura's eyes welled up as she embraced them both, her muffins forgotten on the coffee table. "A baby," I said, almost to myself. "I'm going to be a grandpa." Sophie laughed, teasing me about sounding old, but I didn't care. The thought of a new life, a grandchild, felt like a gift I hadn't expected. Over dinner, we talked about plans, names they were considering, how Sophie would balance school, what kind of crib Adam was already sketching. Laura offered practical advice, her experience with Timmy shining through. As we drove home that night, I glanced at Laura, her face soft in the glow of passing streetlights. "You're going to be an amazing grandma," I said, half joking. She swatted my arm but smiled. "Let's not rush that title," she said, but I could tell she was just as thrilled. That news set off a wave of changes. Sophie's pregnancy brought us closer, as if we were all preparing for something bigger than ourselves. Laura and I spent weekends helping them set up a nursery, painting walls a cheerful yellow and assembling furniture with more laughter than skill. Timmy, now 16, was oddly fascinated by the idea of a niece or nephew, volunteering to babysit before the baby was even born. I'd watch him joke with Sophie, and it struck me how much he'd grown, no longer the little boy who'd once clung to my leg. Emily, too, was finding her way, though her path remained separate. Sophie had kept in touch with her, sharing updates about the pregnancy. Emily responded cautiously, sending thoughtful messages or small gifts, like a knitted blanket she'd made herself. She never pushed for more than Sophie was ready to give, and I respected her restraint, even if I couldn't fully forgive her. During one visit, Sophie mentioned Emily had started volunteering at a community center, teaching sewing classes to kids. "It suits her," Sophie said. "She's trying to give back." I nodded, unsure what to feel but glad Emily was building something for herself. One evening, as Laura and I sat on the porch, watching the leaves fall, I brought up Timmy's question about marriage. It had been circling my mind for weeks. "Laura," I said, taking her hand, "I've been thinking. You've been my rock, my partner in everything. I don't want to imagine this life without you. Would you marry me?" She looked at me, her eyes wide, then softening. "Mike," she said, her voice catching. "Are you sure?" I laughed, squeezing her hand. "Never been more sure." She leaned in, kissing me gently. "Yes," she said. "I'd love to." We kept it quiet at first, telling only Timmy, who whooped so loudly I thought the neighbors would complain. "Really, Dad?" "About time," he said, hugging Laura like she just won a prize. Sophie and Adam were next, and Sophie's reaction, a tearful, beaming smile, made it real. "You two deserve this," she said, and I felt a weight lift, knowing my kids saw Laura the way I did. Planning a wedding wasn't something I'd expected to do at this stage, but Laura made it easy. We wanted something simple, just family and close friends, maybe David and Clara, who'd become steady presences in our lives. Their relationship had deepened, and Clara, now free of her past with Jason, radiated a quiet happiness. David, ever the gentleman, had even helped me pick out a ring for Laura. His advice practical but heartfelt. As winter approached, we set a date for the spring, wanting the ceremony to feel like a new beginning. Timmy took it upon himself to design invitations, his tech skills turning out surprisingly professional results. Sophie offered to handle flowers, her eye for detail shining through. It felt like the whole family was building this moment together. One night, I got a letter from Emily. It was unexpected, her handwriting neat but hesitant. She congratulated me on the engagement, saying Sophie had told her. "I don't expect you to respond," she wrote. "I just want you to know I'm happy for you. You've given our kids a good life, and Laura's a blessing. I'm sorry for everything." I read it twice, then set it aside. I didn't reply, but her words stayed with me, a sign she was trying to make peace, even from a distance. The months leading to the wedding flew by. Sophie's pregnancy progressed, her belly rounding as she powered through her studies. Adam sent me photos of their nursery, now complete with a mural he'd painted himself. Timmy, meanwhile, was juggling school and a part-time job at a local computer shop, saving up for a car he swore he'd buy by summer. Laura and I spent evenings planning, laughing over details like whether to have pie instead of cake. When spring arrived, the wedding day dawned clear and warm. We held it in a small garden near our house, surrounded by blooming trees and the people we loved most. Sophie, glowing and visibly pregnant, walked with Laura as her maid of honor. Timmy stood by my side, cracking jokes to keep my nerves at bay. When Laura appeared, simple and radiant in a pale blue dress, I forgot everyone else. We said our vows, promising to stand by each other through whatever came next, and when I kissed her, the cheers from our small crowd felt like the world celebrating with us. Life didn't stop surprising me. A few months later, Sophie gave birth to a healthy girl, Lily. Holding my granddaughter for the first time, I felt a love I hadn't known was possible. Timmy, true to his word, became her biggest fan, showing up with toys he'd bought with his earnings. Laura took to grandmotherhood with the same grace she brought to everything, her bond with Lily instant and deep. Emily met Lily once, at Sophie's invitation. She didn't stay long, but Sophie said she cried when she held her, whispering apologies to the baby for mistakes she couldn't undo. It was a small step, but it showed Emily was still trying, still reaching for something better. As I watched my family grow, Laura by my side, Sophie and her daughter thriving, Timmy carving his own path, I realized the pain of the past had forged something stronger. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, built on choices we made to keep moving forward. And for the first time, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be,